And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website at weather.gov/Alaska for any updates to the forecast. We'll get started with our aviation forecast for today. Starting off looking out over mainland Alaska, primarily VFR conditions looking pretty nice out with some high pressure overhead over much of the state. However, up along the Arctic coast and down to the Kotzebue Sound area, we are seeing some areas of MVFR and IFR. And then out over much of the Bering Sea, MVFR conditions are expected with IFR conditions for the Aleutian Islands and Alaska Peninsula. Down by southeast Alaska, we have some lower clouds in the area, bringing some MVFR and IFR conditions to areas around the Panhandle. As we move into Tuesday afternoon, clearing up for a lot of the inside water areas in the Panhandle, but out by the Gulf, we're still seeing quite a bit of MVFR and IFR, and some MVFR sneaking into the southern portions of the Panhandle as well, and out by Yakutat. However, out over the mainland part of the state, still seeing predominantly VFR conditions for Tuesday afternoon for the mainland. Out by the northwest coastline, we are going to see some MVFR conditions. And then out over the Bering Sea and Aleutians, a mix of MVFR and IFR conditions are expected. As we move into Wednesday morning, we are going to see continuation of MVFR and IFR throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, starting to make its way into southwest Alaska here on Wednesday morning. But much of the mainland remains under high pressure and VFR conditions expected. Some MVFR just off the coast of the Arctic coastline and down by Kotzebue Sound as well. Out over the Gulf, we're seeing some MVFR throughout much of the Gulf waters, and then widespread MVFR for the Panhandle with some IFR down south. Wednesday afternoon, clearing up a little bit, becoming MVFR for the southern areas and some areas of VFR as we get closer towards Juneau and up by the Haines area. Out over the Gulf waters, we are expected MVFR conditions, and out over mainland Alaska, continuing to see VFR conditions for most locations. MVFR hanging out along the Arctic coastline up north, and then out over the Bering Sea, primarily IFR conditions extending down into the Aleutian Islands as well. Looking at our passes starting up north, Anaktuvuk is expected to be VFR throughout the day on Tuesday, as well as Adigan Pass. As we move down into the Alaska Range, you'll notice a pattern. We are going to see quite a few areas of VFR conditions and the possibility of afternoon and evening thunderstorms from many locations of the Alaska Range. That is true of Lake Clark and Merrill on Tuesday, as well as at Rainy, Windy, Isabel, and Mentasta, all expected to be VFR and all have the chance to see afternoon and evening thunderstorms. As we move down a little bit to the south, Tanita Pass is expected to be VFR throughout the day on Tuesday, as well as Portage, and then down south, Chilkoot and White both expected to be VFR all day Tuesday. Taking a look at our freezing levels, we have our surface freezing level up by the Arctic coastline, moving down through the Kotzebue Sound area. And we have an 8,000-foot freezing line moving through the western interior and up by the Brooks Range. As we look out over southwest areas, we have another 8,000-foot line moving through kind of the central Bering area and then out by southwest Alaska. A little bit cooler air by the central Aleutian Islands. Freezing levels about 6,000 feet there. For icing, one area of icing in the state we are expecting out over the southeastern Bering Sea, Alaska Peninsula, and out by Kodiak Island, above 8,000 feet is expected. Taking a look at our jet stream, a smaller portion of the jet of a northerly direction over northeast Russia at 75 knots, and then becoming more westerly as we move over the northern portions of the state up to as high as 65 knots there. But the strongest portion of the jet is south of the Aleutian Islands, up to 70 to 80 knots out of an a westerly direction. Dropping down to 9,000 feet, we have a southerly component of winds over the western portion of the state, 35 to 40 knots expected there. Light winds over much of the eastern locations and down in the Panhandle. And in circulation around a weak low up north, we are going to see some winds out of a south to southwest direction, 40 knots up by the Seward Peninsula area. And then finally out by the Aleutian Islands, easterly winds up to 35 knots. Dropping down to 3,000 feet, going to still see those easterly winds out by the Aleutians. 35 knots expected there, strongest by the western Aleutian Islands. Quite a bit weaker as we get up into the northern portions of the state. Most of the wind activity will stay off to the northwest. And then as we move down to southwest Alaska, we are going to see a little bit of flow there out of the south, 40 knots expected, and then light winds all the way to the east by the Panhandle. And with those lighter winds, we do not have any turbulence expected around the state for Tuesday, unless you are in one of those or near one of those thunderstorms where there could be quite a bit of turbulence and icing in any of the thunderstorms. And thank you for watching our aviation segment.